Hi, everyone. I saw the conversation between Nicoland and Dugin on Monday because the almighty algorithm served it up. I had not heard of the host before. I have, of course, heard of Land and Dugin and found it a very good conversation, I think, especially because they're both serious thinkers and they are impactful and have been so for decades. So it's, I mean, especially compared to the Zizek-Peterson debate a few years ago, which was rather dull. You had here two thinkers who are, in their own respective ways, deeply steeped in their respective, let's just say, traditions or schools of thought. And I have to say, though, that it's quietly listening to this now several times over, that Nicoland is clearly, I wouldn't say the better thinker, but is a thinker he's a speculative thinker. So he thinks in terms of concepts, but he can also think genealogically, etc. And Dugin, which is something I've talked about before, Dugin is, well, he has a tendency to operate with images, metaphors, and sort of rather, I don't mean this in a derogatory sense, but sort of some simplistic concepts where concept means just a collection of, again, images, associations, etc. Which is why he leaps from Heidegger to angels without taking a breath. To which Nick Land at some point responds in his rather British way. That's, well, really interesting. Which means as much as saying, okay, you've lost me here entirely. So, and this is a few things that, if you're not familiar with took me long enough to the British politeness, understatement, etc. It might be difficult to pick up on some of the criticisms that Nick Land was leveling against Dugin and the way he, let's just say, operates, really, in a sense. So what I want to do here is I want to provide some commentary on some of the things, on everything that was said. And for one reason, it's quite simple. Kant is mentioned, Kant, transcendental idealism. Now, I think that this debate will get tens of thousands, maybe even hundreds of thousands of views in the coming weeks and months. And of those hundreds of thousands of views, probably most will never have heard of Kant's transcendental idealism. They may have heard of the Cartesian subject, but what you have to do is, especially if you're not familiar with any of this, but you're interested in Land and Dugin because it's etchy, and accelerations, etc. You have to, and I'm quite serious about this, you don't trust your associations. You have to think, and this is something that I would level against Dugin, is that he just makes wild associations very often. Not always, but often. He has a tendency to do that. And Nick Land stops him quite often. So the task really is to think conceptually, speculatively, and systematically. And so what I want to do is just to provide some commentary on some of the things that were argued. For example, Nick Land, very briefly but very succinctly, in a precise manner, lays out what Kant's idealism really is, etc. And I'll begin. So I'm not going to watch everything. This is a 2.5 hour discussion. If I did the whole thing, then this would be a 5 or 6 hour stream, which is impossible. So there were just a few things I'll look at. I won't look at the genealogy of liberalism, etc. I think that's all very insightful. I'll begin where Nick Land starts speaking on Goethe's Faust and Mephistopheles. And before we begin, I'd just like to point out that if you'd like to take a course with me on Martin Heidegger and technology, then please follow the link in the description of this video and sign up. We have seminars starting next week. I'm also open to any questions that come in or comments via super chat here on YouTube. So if you have a question, those are the questions that I will see. The rest I won't bother with. So take this course if you want to understand our time. Heidegger is the first serious thinker who addressed the essence of technology, its domain, but also importantly, its finitude. Yeah. Its finite occurrence, hence, which is to say, it is not absolute, it is not exclusive. The multidimensionality of being was something I missed in this conversation. It always seemed monodirectional. And with Heidegger, there is, so Dugin talks a lot about opening up, etc. But it's again tied to perhaps an associative mode of representing the world. So again, head over to the course enrollment page and join the course on Heidegger, the essence of technology. If you're listening to this in early October, then you are in time to join us for the live seminars. If you listen to this later, just get the self-study tier. Okay, so I have not ever shared a live video as I want to do now. I hope that this works. So I haven't downloaded the file. I am going to just hit play, and I hope that you can. If you can't hear the audio, please could someone let me know as quickly as possible, because then I'll just shut down this stream and download the video, upload it, and start again, which will be a bit unfortunate, but well, techniques isn't absolute, is it?
There's been this bizarre amount of Satanism discussion recently, and so I thought, I know this is a text that is very important to Professor Dugin, and which is in Faust, part 1. I think the Faustian spirit is very much part of this discussion, where Faust summons Mephistopheles and asks him, "Who are you?" And Mephistopheles says, "Ein Teil von jener Kraft, die stets das Böse will und stets das Gute schafft." A portion of that power which always works for evil and affects the good. Which evil, sorry, this is the translation in English, good, which always wants evil, which always works for evil, and always creates the good. So that's Goethe's, if you say, well, what is Satanism? That's Goethe's answer to that. I think it's very interesting. Mandeville's, the consolidation of paleoliberalism in England really takes place in the Scottish Enlightenment. You know, perhaps the
notice what Land just did. He tied the Mandeville to Mephistopheles and to the Faustian soul. Just one perhaps remark here. I would read Goethe's Faust slightly differently. Faust doesn't necessarily directly summon Mephistopheles, but Mephistopheles is Faust really summons is the spirit of the earth, the Erdgeist, the earth spirit, who tells him that he's not of the same ilk as he is. And so he continues his search for something, for a spirit or a force that could help him find what he's looking for, which is knowledge beyond human knowledge. But we have to keep in mind that Mephistopheles is not Satan, it's not Lucifer, is not the devil, is a little helper devil, if you like, a representative of the satanic on earth. And Mephistopheles is in a sense contracted by God. If you read the prelude, I'm just looking. Sorry, the prologue in Heaven by Goethe's Faust, where the archangels sing the praises of creation, but Mephistopheles shows up and says, well, there's a toil and moil of man. So it's Mephistopheles who takes an interest in man, in the crown of creation, where the archangels have no concern for the human being. It's Mephistopheles who has. And so they make a bet. The first wager is the wager between God and Mephistopheles. And I think that's significant because Mephistopheles inserts himself as a poodle onto the scene and then follows Faust home and transforms in a minute that it's where it makes sense in the play, but also it's important. It's quite different to Marlowe, where the devil realizes that Marlowe is already lost. He's already, he's at the very least open to sin. Now here, it's not about sin. This is Goethe's Faust is a post-Christian play. It's a post-Christian poem. Even the God in the prologue in Heaven is not necessarily the Christian God. And especially when you look at Faust 2, the second part, you realize that Mephistopheles is almost less, and at least sometimes less and less significant, less and less important. Faust is looking for something to help him drive further, but not so much into knowledge, but this is where it's also crucial. It's actually about the entirety of the human experience. So this is not about gaining incredible power. He wants to understand what it means to be human, from the highest to the lowest, from the lowest to the highest level, anything that can be experienced. So we have to be careful. Again, if you just follow the Faustian soul, Mephistopheles, etc., there's a pact between the human being and the devil, and the human being sells his soul. Faust does not believe there is a soul. Signing the contract in blood is a mere formality. Mephistopheles, however, lets Faust believe that he was actually in charge, that he has anything to say in the matter. So what Nick Land will get to is that there are forces in history, or forces in a higher even than history, that do drive the production or the bringing forth of the common good. So in some sense, what Land does, and it's also in its response to Tucker Carlson's recent guest on the supposed Satanism of Nick Land. Nick Land points out he takes, in some sense, Nick Land takes Christianity more seriously than most Christians would. So I find that rather fascinating. But if we understand Goethe's Faust, to come back to this, as the play in which, or the tragedy in which we can trace how we became modern, then Mephistopheles plays a role, but it isn't necessarily the role of the devil. But now, what is it that he quotes? I mean, not of a Christian devil. So what is it? He says, ein Teil von jener Kraft, die stets das Böse will und stets das Gute schafft. So a part of that force that always wants evil and always creates the good. Now, what we mean by evil is not necessarily just, well, you know, only outright evil acts, etc., but could be the negativity. Ich bin der Geist, der stets verneint, says Mephistopheles. Yeah, this is important. We should not forget that. Ich bin der Geist, der stets verneint, is what he says right after Mephistopheles is. So Goethe asks him, what do you mean by I'm a part of that force that always wants evil and always creates the good? Then Mephistopheles says, I am the spirit that negates. Now, if we mention the first part, we have to mention this, because this is where Mephistopheles actually explains what he means. And what is this? This is the experience of modernity. Or forms part of the experience of modernity, which is to say that negativity is a driving force in everything, in logic and in history. Spirit itself is negativity. What pushes Hegel's signs of logic forward is the nothing. So that Mephistopheles is a spirit that negates, that's the crucial thing. So the question is, how can negativity be made sense of? That is, if you like to read this very philosophically, the tragedy that is Faust, the tragedy of becoming modern, that's what it's about. It's this negativity, yeah? So we should keep that in mind, and then we can listen to the rest here, and then we move on to another part.
The single most perfect distillation of it is found in Mandeville's The Fable of the Bees, which I don't think I can summarize very easily with a quote. I think it's just to say he goes on to
Okay, not to be facetious, but you can't summarize Goethe's Faust in a single quote, plus neglecting the explanation that Mephistopheles himself gives, just one line down. So Nick Land has not summarized Goethe's Faust, as he apparently wishes to imply that he did.
Influenced Adam Smith, and if I could just a very quick citation from The Wealth of Nations, where Smith says he generally, and he means the individual. It's actually said before every individual. He generally, indeed, neither intends to promote the public interest, nor knows how much he is promoting it. By preferring the support of domestic that of foreign industry, he intends only his own security, and by directing that industry in such a manner as its produce may be of the greatest value, he intends only his own gain. And he is in this, as in many other cases, led by an invisible hand to promote an end which was no part of his intention. And that, to me, is the essential ideological aspect of individualism as it relates to paleoliberalism.
Listen to this again.
That's to say, the fundamental assumption is that there is an empty position, what I call the empty summit, which would be
tabula rasa,
an instantiated public morality. And instead, that function is delegated to the invisible hands. I will insist on pluralizing it. The invisible hands are the key theological and economic, and maybe in a sense even ethnic axis.
Okay, so why does he say ethnic? Because in this debate, from the beginning, I think they both agree to a certain extent that reason isn't universal, but that reason itself is ultimately ethnic. So the British reason or rationality is different than the French. We'll get to this again later on. Now that's debatable. One could certainly say that there's certain aspects how reason unfolds differently. the question is that within the same universal or even matrix, or is there not? Or is it really just particularities? And are those clearly ethnically defined or delineable? I've listened to this passage quite a few times now, and I've so far not been able to find the connection between the invisible hands, or hand rather, that Adam Smith relates and theorizes on, and others, and Goethe's Faust. But let's listen on, so maybe we'll hear it together.
On which paleoliberalism determines itself.
Okay, so you know, one of the issues of this entire debate is that you're bombarded with ism after ism after ism, paleomodernism, modernism, modernity, paleomodernity, liberalism, paleoliberalism, etc., 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 which I think increases confusion, because it's not a why, because you're ultimately just dealing with your own associations that you may have with those terms. So so you're possessed by eidoloi, by little shadow images. So maybe there is some dark sorcery going on here after all, yeah. So whenever you hear someone just go through ism, nothing's been said. What you've heard is trigger words that trigger your associations. That's all that's happened. That's all that's happened. You've not learned anything. And so again, what is the connection between Dr. Faust, who says im Anfang war die Tat. Im Anfang war die Tat. Enache en hologos. He translates as, in the beginning was the deed, not the word. Not logos as sense or meaning. No. In the beginning was the deed. This is his revelation. This is his appropriation, Faust's appropriation of Luther and St. John. The deed, not the invisible hand. So you see, I don't see the argument here. What I see is making an association. An association can be completely wild. That's to say, it just connects two things that have nothing to do with each other. But because of the way we listen to things now, the way we listen to ideas, let's be honest, all of you, including myself, how many podcasts do you listen to on a regular, just per week? How many hours? And just washes through you. And it, speaking of brainwashing, so it launders right through you. In the beginning was the deed, is what Faust actually says. There's no invisible hand. The hands are clear. It's God. Only we can debate whether this God is Christian or not. I don't think he's Christian in Goethe's Faust. And by the way, take my Faust course and you learn why, okay? And there's and Mephistopheles, there's nothing invisible. Mephistopheles does appear. The spirit of negation does appear. The spirit of negation names himself. And the spirit of negation names himself as such. He appears as such. He begins to be that. He is part of. Yeah. And of course, the spirit of negation is not the only spirit. There's also the spirit of affirmation. And so the invisible hand doesn't really work here. But what's ultimately then? So let's listen on a couple more minutes, and then we'll see what that land wants to say.
And there are huge consequences for that. It is, I mean, maybe you should just at this point just stop there to say, the Mephistopheles' speech and Adam Smith's statement on the invisible hand are almost identical. They're both saying that the common good is not a deliberate intention at the level of the individual.
Yeah.
And it creates the good because of a higher power, because of the fact that it's guided.
Okay, but careful. That higher power, yeah. So the way the Land sets this up now is that because he referred to himself as just radically trusting the plan. And something I've said in private seminars over the years is that one of the issues I have, wherever he might stand now or not, accelerationism, etc., doesn't matter. It's ultimately all phlegmatism. And it's a phlegmatic philosophy of non-action, of anti-action. And again, if you build this on Faust, the very scene where the spirit of negativity appears to him is right after Faust appropriates St. John. In the beginning was the deed. And that includes the human being. Those higher forces, if you want to speak in these, silly metaphysical terms, they're not. There's to come to Heidegger, being needs the human being. Yeah, being, even as Gestell, as the essence of technology, requires the human being. Being on its own is nothing, less than nothing. The human being, yeah, is required, and so the human being is in some sense responding and is responsible. And also what the human being really has to become is to feel responsible, to sense the responsibility. Because what I hear very often coming from Land is that there's no responsibility. It's just the plan that unfolds, whatever the plan currently is. Because the wonderful thing about providence, and this is something like, for example, Giambattista Vico would never say, is that anything that happens is part of the plan. Yeah. Again, in the beginning was the deed. That's when the spirit of negativity shows up. The spirit of negation, the spirit that negates, that itself is an action. So actually not the spirit of negativity that was poorly translated on my part just now. It's a spirit that negates. That's an activity. And that spirit of negation, or the spirit that negates, he becomes the necessary companion of Faust to do what? To achieve what? God is never mentioned ever once more. To move out of Christianity. To move out of God's plan. That's what Faust is about. To rekindle the relationship with antiquity. There's no invisible hand that just so steers the human being. And also, let's get to Adam Smith. The notion of the invisible hand at Adam Smith is a secularized metaphor of God. And it describes as much the market as much as social relations. It doesn't, as a matter of fact, just mean that there's a higher force. Because that's how, if you assume that, it's the way in which Adam Smith, and is it mentioned once or a couple of times? It's not a major part of the theory. It's what it's a part of is it's a metaphor to describe how markets are so complex that they appear to be steered as if by an invisible hand. Now, to the other point, that the good is the outcome of a higher plan. That's, who would say that? So, because that insinuates that all that is necessary is to lean back. The human being is an active participant in, even if, let's say you're Catholic, yeah? Maybe there's some good Catholics listening. Catholic saints actively participate in God's in the creation, not as creators, but as, or in providence, insofar as they help to bring it about. History is not just data set after data set after data set, which is what someone who believes that AI is necessarily going to replace human beings would assume. No, we have to make sense of history. That's part of God's providence, and it's not just given to us. So, from the very beginning, if you're listening to this, how this is being set up is, you don't have to act. Just lean back, trust the plan. This is where this whole conversation ends up then as well. And then in the end, this rather awkward turn to the occult, when they finally, come over the woodwork and say what they want to say. And the occult, I'll just say this now. So irrationalism and rationalism happen to be two sides of the same coin. And if you want to be critical of the Enlightenment, good. But occultism happens to be just the other side of illumination, of enlightenment. All right, so let's just on for a couple.
By this religious axis, the empty summit, the fact that there is, to some degree at least, massive constriction and delimitation of what would be an authoritative public moral authority. So that, to me, that's what paleoliberalism is. That is not at all what I think we're seeing now among people who call themselves liberals.
Wonder why he doesn't mention Ricardo. Okay, so that's all good. Let's move on to for next Kant. Now, this is very interesting what Land has to say on Kant. He's a very good Kantian. I hope this is around here.
The critical tradition, where in Kant's version,
let me go a bit further back. Sorry, everyone.
Away those idols, and you get it obviously right to Nietzsche's Twilight of the Idols. He's still within that tradition, and that becomes the critical tradition, where in Kant's version, which leads on the main line to Heidegger, who of course is crucial figure to you. But
speak of the devil, don't forget, join the Heidegger Essence of Technology course now. Link to enroll is in the description of this video. So now is the time. Let's go back to good old Professor Land.
But in Kant's initial formulation, it's the confusion of an object for the conditions of objectivity. So
have you heard that, everyone? Listen to this again. Very succinct.
Who of course is crucial figure to you. But in Kant's initial formulation, it's the confusion of an object for the conditions of objectivity. So
okay, let's listen.
Transcendental philosophy is trying to recover the conditions of possibility for objectivity from idols of objectivity that have been put in their place.
So this notion of idols is striking. It's not necessarily that Kant immediately goes there from the beginning. You could say that this is perhaps part of his religion, but also part of how he understands the moral law. That there's and this is to doesn't do it justice, but reason, pure reason, which is critiqued by Kant, let's just say, ran amok before Kant in Leibnizian, Wolffian ontology or metaphysics, where without tying, without the need for experience or without experiencing anything, so ultimately an ontology decoupled from the phenomena, which bases itself on, you could say, on Descartes, where also the phenomena are decoupled from the laws of well, historical phenomena are no longer form part of the world, because what matters is that the physical, the natural laws are upheld. And what Kant sees is that that there's a tendency in pure reason to conflate an object for objectivity. So it leaps from object to objectivity, but we could put it quite differently, maybe the other way around, is that what the categories are, so that the categories are applied to objects without intuition, objects without appearance. To put it bluntly, show me a monad, Mr. Leibniz. And so this is very important to point out by Nick Land. And now to tie this to idol worship, it means that what is even the basis? So to say there's a certain idolatry of the objects of pure reason. And what Kant then does is he achieves, and and they go into what they mean by this in terms of age. Let's just say there are certain moral codes that everyone has to adhere by everywhere, and if you don't, then you are sacrificed. So now you can try and think through how this relates to Kant's categorical imperative, etc. How he tries to, in a sense, this is why Kant is the king of the Enlightenment, because he doesn't deify reason as capital R reason, and he also at the same time overcomes the Enlightenment because he realizes that this is, again, self-inflicted Unmündigkeit. What's Unmündigkeit in English? I can't think of it right now. No, it's not coming, so I have to look it up. Selbstverschuldete Unmündigkeit. Minority. Self-imposed immaturity. That's the official one. Okay, so immaturity. Forgive me, sorry. So, but what Kant also does, just to add to what Mr. Land was pointing out, Kant is so revolutionary because he ties for the first time formal logic, the principle of non-contradiction, ultimately, to experience. So that from now on, experience is structured by not just time and space as forms of intuition and the categories, but really by the principle of non-contradiction. The objects so objects are not given, objects appear to representation from appearances which may or may not relate back to things in themselves, Dinge an sich, nicht das Ding an sich, nicht the thing in itself, capital T, but Dinge an sich, things in themselves, which are given purely as a nominal limit concept for Kant. They are not in another realm. There's no outsideness that we have to insinuate, which again, if you yap on about outsideness, as some of the participants in this conversation do, then what you're showing, what you're proving yourself to be doing, is you're trying to think of clearly defined arenas or areas that have an outside. We're looking at the continuum of experience and appearance. So what just to add to what's been said on Kant now, what we no longer then have access to after Kant is perhaps even just the question how things might be as they are in themselves. And you can say that if objects appear in representation, constructed ultimately as resistanceless, without objection, funnily enough, the next step to Heidegger's Bestand in Gestell, standing reserve and framing, isn't all that far. I've written about this in my book on Heidegger on Death and Being, and I've actually also recorded a video on this here on the channel. If you want to look at it, I think it's The Origin of Gestell, if you're interested. So let's listen on.
And I think that you can see that the problems with that and its opportunities are also at work in the liberal tradition. I mean, probably at work everywhere. And holding open empty summits, to formulate it in that way, is a very similar gesture. It's to take away the idol that is occupying that position that should be the open, transcendental, sacred position.
Okay, sorry. So transcendental does transcendental has got nothing to do with transcendent or even non-available, as what is now being suggested here. If I hear Mr. Land correctly, I might be wrong. Transcendental has a very specific meaning in Kant, which is the necessary conditions for experience that go before time and space, etc. So they are always already. And transcendental idealism is what? Is not the bridging or synthesis of rationalism and empiricism, where rationalism just begins with the mind and empiricism begins with experience, and Kant brings them neatly together as if that were possible. No, transcendental idealism is something new. It's revolutionary because there's a continuous projection outward by subjectivity that generates objectivity, against which, and that's the transcendental plane, against which, because of the necessary, due to the necessary conditions that are set up in this manner by the transcendental, does not transcendent. It's crucial to understand. Is generated a field that allows for objects to form, if, however, and objects are only formed in judgment. So objects are never given. An object, there are no objects, to put it bluntly. Objects are formed in judgment from appearances that become representations. The whole mechanism, if you want to call it a mechanism, which it really isn't, that is what is going on. So what I just heard suggested to me that Mr. Land is suggesting that the transcendental someone has to do something with a transcendent open. Now, he may have meant something else. He may have meant that the transcendental opens up the subject to the objective in a manner that doesn't idolize objects. But that, again, isn't the case, because, as a matter of fact, the first critique, especially the first critique, sets everything up in such a manner that after Hume and after Leibniz, the only way to preserve the phenomena is to make them entirely dependent upon the categories of subjectivity, which you should not conflate with your own subjectivity. It's not you. It's a logical subject. So it's, in that sense, strictly Cartesian. Now, the next, for Kant himself, just to trace this, and again, if you want to learn more about Kant, take my Kant course, which we end on the sublime, das Erhabene. It is das Erhabene, das Erhaben, it takes you out. The sublime is what takes the human being, even, not just the subject, back out into the world in a moment of shock. But it takes Kant quite some time to get there. The first critique, which is the most impactful, has already revolutionized how we see world and nature.
That is actually the common religious direction of of society. Yeah, I'll take that as a complete thought. But no, sorry, I won't take it as a complete thought. At the risk of a slight digression, maybe I can just actually relate it more directly to your work, in the sense that,
it's strange. I did my PhD at Warwick probably almost 20 years after Land had left. But there's just something about a place where you have really good thinkers. I don't know when he left, actually, but I was there from 2014 onwards. Where you recognize certain habits or not habits, perhaps so much, but certain ways of speaking and but also thinking. So that and Land. I want to be clear. This is an incredible. These couple of minutes here on Kant could be earth-shattering to someone who has an ear for it. And I hope that they, to those who have ears to hear, it will be earth-shattering if you've never heard this before, if you've read a bit of Kant, etc. But if you, in any seriousness, want to engage with Land, you have to understand Kant. You have to understand why the Kantian transcendental revolution why the Copernican turn is so revolutionary, as he says, B16 in the first critique, that objects must now adhere to the mind.
it seems to me that your fourth political theory is actually in a double sense Heideggerian. Like it's Heideggerian because you talk about Heidegger a lot, and Heidegger is the key to you to actually.
Okay, so this we're gonna listen to this now for about I think almost 10 minutes. So I'll disappear from the screen for a second. I'll be back again. I'll turn on my camera again in a minute.
Actually kind of organizing what is going to be substantially and positively the fourth political theory. But it's also that your work is structured very similar to Heidegger's in the sense that actually it's a question. The structure of the book is a question. And the substantive work that Heidegger's doing in terms of eliminating metaphysical ontologies, idols of being, and in terms that are most interesting to you, idols of the human, you two are spending, the substance of the book is clearing away these idols of the position that would be the fourth political theory, and to understood correctly, the fourth political theory, like the question of being for Heidegger, is actually a question being posed articulately by your book, not something that can be just understood as another object level claim that you're proposing some model of politics as a substitute for these idols that you're wanting to demolish. So, I mean, I guess I'm saying on that, do you think that is a sound approach to what you're doing in that work and on that line of inquiry?
You have grasped the very, 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 very core intention of fourth political theory. It is exactly as you have said. It is just the question. It is not the answer. It is clearing, preparing the terrain for something to come. It is open-summed concept. So absolutely, it is liquidation of idols, of the modernity, of political modernity, with this limited liberalism, communism, or national.
Okay, now to be a bit mean, this is all well explained by Land. As you could see, it tied quite well together with his account of Kant's critical philosophy and what Kant tries to achieve with his critique of pure reason. Now, Dugin, who has an agenda, I mean, he says it outright, I want to end Western modernity, to which one can only reply, I'm sorry, sir, but without the West, there is no modernity. You would not be using the very tools you're currently using without the West or the Occident, which spans 2,500 years, if not more. I should also point out that traditionalism as an ideology is the idolatry of capital T tradition, which is a movement that is purely reactionary, yeah, reacting against the quote-unquote age of quantity. Guénon will be mentioned quite a few times. So if you want to be without idols, idolatry, then you can't idolize capital T tradition in the manner in which everyone does. And I hate to break it to Mr. Dugin, who actually himself admits this a bit later on, is that traditionalism is Western. So, I mean, what one should not underestimate, though, you know, while this is a philosophical debate to a certain degree, these two figures, and one more perhaps than the other, and you can decide for yourself who's meant here, there's clearly a political agenda. As just this should be obvious to anyone who's halfway present.
Nationalism and a kind of invitation to put the question of the politics in the open. So it is questioning. It is not the model. So when, for example, I have spoken with my friend, so
this is an important point by Dugin, just in general, that and this is how this entire debate, you know, if you look at listen to the beginning, liberalism is ultimately an extension of an Anglo interpretation of reason, or of the individual, of what it means to be human, that spreads across the globe and is supposed to be accepted everywhere. And then Dugin, against the three ideologies, fascism, communism, liberalism, introduces the fourth political theory, which has the intention of opening up a question. So we take him at his word here that there's nothing else behind it. But if you couple that with, we need to destroy Western modernity, then again, you have to wonder whether it's really just a question.
A very interesting philosopher and thinker, Alain de Benoit.
Because, by the way, if you want to be a good Heideggerian, then overcoming modernity is impossible. There is no overcoming of anything, because nothing is monodirectional. Nothing is just an ism. There are always moments of overturning different dimensions from within. But as we're talking about possibility being as the possible, then any deed, and the deed is very important in Heidegger, die Tat, as he says in Contributions to Philosophy, anything that's done, that's genuinely achieved and decided for, feeds back into, not just reflects back, but actually impacts on being, and that unfolds as a multiplicity of possibilities immediately, which themselves have infinite ramifications. So that's genuine openness. If all you do is compare three isms and say, here's my non-ism, is that really openness?
In Moscow 20 years ago, maybe a little less, 20, something like that, we have spoken about what could replace the main figures of the classical political theories: class in Marxism, individual in liberalism, and nation or race in the third third political theory, they are, in our opinion, idols. So they are just something that is accepted uncritically. That is a closed summit concept. So you should do that because of class. You should do that because of individual. You should do that because of nation or race. And what could replace them? And we have simultaneously came to the conclusion that we should let this subject to be something indefinite, so something open. And we agreed with Alain de Benoit about the concept of Dasein.
Okay, so just off the start, Dasein is not a subject. On my channel, please listen to the video, Is Dasein Just Another Subject? So this confusion of terms that so often happens with Dugin, I think betrays the incapacity to think conceptually in a strict manner. It's always just looking for the next metaphor. What can we call this? We can call it Dasein. Okay, here's another word. First of all, Dasein, as far as I know, is a German word. Now, Dasein now gets thrown around in all languages of the world. Dasein in English, Dasein in Italian, Dasein in Russian. What Dasein is not a subject, is not even a noun. Dasein means what? It's an adverb. It goes to the verb. It's the original openness to what to being. What's being? Presence. Being is presence. The presence difference thanks to which beings appear as they appear in this epoch. So what Dugin does is he subjectivizes Dasein. He turns Dasein into a noun. Why does he do this? Because this is how he, quote unquote, thinks. So what Dugin always needs is a term that he can associate with another term. And then you'll hear that what he says, what he does to Dasein, you have to say, stabs it in the back, is that he turns it into, there are different Daseins. No, there isn't. There aren't. There can't be, because there is not even one Dasein in the manner in which you understand it. There's not a plurality of Daseins that run around. What does Heidegger say? Heidegger says in Fundamental Concept of Metaphysics, never would it have occurred to me to assume that Dasein runs around in the streets and uses fork and knife to eat, or uses the streetcar or the tram to get someplace. Yeah, if you haven't picked up on this, this is Heidegger's humor. What he points out to his students, those who can hear, maybe one or two in the audience of 200, is that that Dasein is not a being in the sense in which some might understand. It's not a human being that you can see running around. So there are not different Daseins. And this is what the entire quote-unquote fourth political theory is based on. Why not just say subject then? Why not just say subject? Which is, funnily enough, Dugin also does, with his radical subject, which we'll get to a bit later.
Heideggerian answer. So the main figure, the subject of the fourth political theory should be Dasein.
Out the window. Yeah.
And that...
You see, so the fourth political theory is already collapsed in on itself. Because all this, this is an operation. How can we call this? We call it Dasein. Because then we can attach all these different things like culture and everything else to it.
Creates a new geometry.
Okay, a new geometry. Where's this coming from? I mean, none of this makes any sense. This creates a new geometry. How is Dasein a geometric space now, apparently? So he's now left the realm of philosophical discourse and has entered into throwing the wildest associations out there. But I think, as I said, there's an agenda to it. There's a rationale to it.
New approach, man, to the field of the politics. So we should construct the institutions, economies, social relations.
So first of all, who is this we? Yeah, and also what you might not be able to see from Russia, yeah, is that people actually do this. If you believe that German subjectivity is the same as Italian subjectivity, or that even Bavarian subjectivity is the same as Prussian subjectivity, then you are clearly, if you just want to use these ridiculous ways of associating something with something other, then you have clearly not ever traveled. There is no unitary subjectivity, which you insinuate that there is. And I wonder who this we is. And I wonder if he hasn't understood that institutions are always, in any event, different in particular. And that, yes, I think what he wants to get to is that quote unquote liberalism, which is identical with globalism, to use this other term that they throw around a lot, that they have a tendency to crowd out particularities and local distinction, etc. Now, Heidegger would refer to this as the planetary. Nothing to do with liberalism or so quote unquote globalism. The planetary is something else. Because what's striking about Dugin's false political theory is that it is planetary. It is ultimately looking at the planet and then saying, well, instead of homogenizing everything, everyone must have their own right to self-determination. It's a planetary view at the world. It's the geopolitical subject that represents world as planets and then looks at planetary civilizations that have specific cosmic tasks. This is what other Russians say.
Basing on existence before it is shaped as, for example, class or this kind of subjectivity or other class type of subject. So it is, but this absence of the concrete project is not just default, not just something we miss.
Well, he did just say that there is a concrete project. But okay.
Or lack, that is a kind of richness. So the fourth political theory is open-end theory. So it is the concept.
I know it's not his first language, but to use corporate English is just not appropriate. Open-end. It's an open-ended process.
With open source.
So which one is it? Is it open or is it an end? Just kidding.
Theory. So you could follow all the elements rationally, because it is based on the philosophy, on political philosophy, on the history, and you could combine or try to transcend that. That you can answer this open question as you wish. So when I have spoken very interesting elements with a disciple of Heidegger, Professor Hermann in Freiburg, he was
von Heidegger was Martin Heidegger's private secretary, not necessarily his disciple. Von Hermann dedicated his life and his life work to Heidegger's work and was given a lectureship, a professorship at the University of Freiburg after Heidegger's death, where von Hermann taught and wrote until he became an emeritus and much longer. I met him a couple of times. The conversation that Dugin here references, I think, used to be at least, years ago, should be on YouTube, and I think it's in English.
his last pupil and follower, and he was the head of the cathedra of the phenomenology in the Freiburg University. And I have said to him, he was very close to Heidegger, to Hermann, that I think that there are multiplicity of Daseins. There is not only one Dasein, human Dasein.
There's not even one Dasein. That's the whole point of it. Why are you trying to turn it into a homunculus?
But there are so many Daseins.
So you can see how this Dugin wants to be able to represent something. Oh, you should start. This is something you should learn here. It's not about whether someone is right or wrong. You should begin to learn how someone, quote unquote, thinks, or rather represents and imagines something, and then how this operates, how he continues to operate with it. So he wants to imagine Dasein. That's the first thing he wants to do. Then we're already outside anything to do with transcendental idealism. Yeah. So Dugin is actually turning Heidegger's Dasein into a quasi-Cartesian subject that is only not Cartesian because it receives historical attributes, cultural attributes. Still not Dasein.
Science, as the civilizations, as culture, he started to think, and he said Heidegger would deny that. So for him, the Dasein was unique, and that was the relation to the death. And I have found an argument. So, but if you consider how the death is perceived in Japan, in Russia.
Okay, Heidegger nowhere says that this is about how death is perceived. How is this so that it might even be, Mr. Dugin, that what Heidegger refers to as Dasein is particularly European, Occidental. And that even though he speaks of primitive Dasein in Being and Time, that primitive Dasein is not really building or forming history. Or if primitive Dasein does, then it's not to the full extent in which Dasein properly actually can. Now, what is Dasein? I said this again. Dasein is the initial openness there for being. It goes to being as a verb. So being is verbal. That's to say, there's a verbal presence that opens up in the midst of which the human being finds himself, thanks to which beings appear in a certain manner. In this epoch, it's Gestell. Being is Gestell. And framing, positionality, etc. The concentration of challenging forth that difference lets beings appear only as standing reserve. Yeah? That's beings. Quite simple. It's difficult to think, but it's not that, as Heidegger himself says. It's very simple. It's just very difficult for people to think through because it requires what? Thinking. What Dugin does is he wants to imagine different Daseins running around on the planet with different cultural attributes who do different things. Now we've left philosophy behind. Now we're actually in a different... You don't need to abuse Heidegger for this. You could just as well just speak about different civilizations that would be much better suited for you. You don't need to talk about Dasein. Now, to speak on death, my book on Heidegger is Heidegger on Death and Being, an answer to the Seinsfrage. In principle, Dasein is being towards death. That's Dasein. It's not how death is perceived in different cultures. That is not the point. The point is that we, the human being, ontically speaking now, a distinction that you never draw, Mr. Dugin, why don't you mention the ontic ontological difference? So, ontologically, Dasein is towards its death. Do you hear this? Is. It's verbal, it's active, is towards it. It's not a thing that also is next to death or perceives death. The human being ontically has a relationship with death, with mortality, because of Dasein's ontological towards structure towards death, which is also care, as he says. Being towards death is care, ontologically speaking, which is why ontically we might care for the dying, or we might be utterly indifferent, which is also a response only possible on the positivity of that ontological towards structure. It's got nothing to do with cultural differences and how death is differently perceived. Because as a matter of fact, perception doesn't matter, judgment doesn't matter. What matters is Dasein's ontological structures. And those might be the same across everything, which is why Dasein can come into touch, ontically speaking now, with each other. Human beings, qua Dasein, come in touch precisely because of this. Or can come in touch because of that.
In China, in Western world, in Islamic world, in India, there's so...
And by the way, just so to mention this, he's not saying anything. He's just naming something. It's China, Arabic world, the West. It's so broad a term. I mean, have you, again, go to Europe. See how different in regions of Spain death is treated. See how differently death is approached in Italy, in different regions, etc. It's not always all just the same. So these hyper categorizations and universalizations that you're always bombarded with here, I don't know if they're any helpful. But again, it's just working with associations. Oh yeah, I'm sure that Chinese people bury their dead differently. Blah 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 blah. Again, this is no longer a philosophical discussion. At this point, it just becomes, look, I have these random examples of something. Now let me build an entire political theory on my corruption of the Heidegger's notion of Dasein. And especially, apparently never taking into consideration Seinsgeschichte, which is explicitly only Occidental, where Dasein with a hyphen becomes the Zeit, die Stätte, for being in its unfolding historically.
So many different relations to the death. That is not one universal relation of being to the non-being. So that is culturally defined. And he would say you should discuss that with Heidegger, but it is impossible. So multiplicity of Daseins, that is the principle that we should not have only one fourth political theory, but so many fourth political theories as we have civilization. So I think that is this.
What's a civilization? I just hear a word. I don't hear. Why civilization? Why not culture? What's a civilization? Is this a Spenglerian understanding of civilization? And in some sense, don't we have that? Just by default. I mean, I'm sorry that you had people come in from the outside and do a communist revolution in your country. But in some sense, because all this talk about multipolarity, etc. To me, there's just too much reification going on. Too much hypostasis.
This plurality is embedded in the concept, and open source. That doesn't mean that I, as Russian, I know what should be placed on the empty summit. No, but our understanding of absence of something on this empty summit is as well Russian. So we have our our intuitions, our suggestions.
Okay, just to be a bit mean again, the empty summit. Now he brings in the Russian understanding. That's all fine and good. Is that the universal Godhead that you were dancing around, which you're getting to at the end of the conversation already, anyways? Isn't that a sort of universalism? Maybe I misunderstood, but towards the end, and I won't get to this because it won't be too long, but towards the end, they show themselves to be good Neoplatonists. Which is a terrifying ideology, because, and maybe the oldest one in the world, because it wishes to reduce everything to an emanation of the sterile one. It's a corruption of the thought of the one and many. It's a destruction of the thought, or of the demand and the question how thinking and being belong together.
Our approximation of something that should be put there, and you could have totally different answer, different to that. So that is very, very important to accept in forced political theory, the plurality of the civilizational answers, not to impose a new idol. Forced political theory has no name because we try to avoid to create new idol instead of capitalism, socialism, or nationalism. So we try to enlarge the field of freedom, I would say.
Okay. The freedom, I take it to self-determination, according to one's own culture and civilization. Now, that's all fair and good. If you want to tie this to the closest to Heidegger, you shouldn't speak of different Daseins, but almost to be honest, almost different rather histories of being and ways of responding to being that are so distinct that they, simply by language, live, as Heidegger says himself, in different houses of being. This is the Heidegger has a very important text by him, is the dialogue on, a conversational language between a Japanese and an interlocutor, I think is the English title. Which, by the way, we're reading at the upcoming Heidegger course. Why? Because translation language is so crucial in the technical epoch. We have to know what we're even saying in any language before we even start translating. So the link to enroll is in the description of this video, also here in the chat. So follow the link, join us. We're beginning in 2 weeks if you want to join the live seminar, so you learn some real Heidegger. You want to learn how, thinking rather than anything else. Okay, let's maybe continue a bit more here.
I'm wondering whether Oren's got some.
Okay, yeah, that's moving on to here, I think.
So let's say as the project of the complete dehumanization of humanity and a way to come to some outside of the earth, of the humanity, of the history, to some very, very ominous, a bit frightening perspective of the future. with the total replacement by the humanity and by life on the earth by something completely different. And that was very, very, very beautiful explained, I think. So that in your early version of your philosophy, there was the kind of line of modernity pointing to total self-destruction and self overcoming of the life, of the history, of the time. And that in that sense, the paleomodernity served just as the first stage of the same project. And that, as traditionalists, I agree. So it seems that you were completely right. But there is the other version, and that I think is very close to MAGA. So Make America Great Again movement
which is literally turning out to be used for the transhumanist agenda. And you make of that what you will. I would, of course, agree with Dugin that the dehumanization project is rather frightening, but that it's also, in some degree, perhaps built into, not to be fair to him, to certain aspects, at least, of modernity, perhaps. But perhaps not. You know, perhaps we shouldn't just always talk in abstractions. The transhumanist project, or the dehumanization project, is perhaps more biblical than some might appreciate, let's just say.
is to separate paleoliberalism, paleomodernity, paleocapitalism from the neo-capitalism, neo-modernity, neo-progressive. So both positions of yours are very, very pertinent, I would say. Sorry.
Oh yeah, sorry. I'm just going to say that insofar as there is that separation, it's because there's an interference pattern because of the fact that modernity is meaning for us simultaneously these very different things. And
okay, but so that's good. Why don't we take this seriously, though? Doesn't this indicate that so-called modernity is itself, you know, if we just use it as a historical, philosophical epoch, a reconstruction, then it's a reconstruction that's often taken to begin with Descartes, but it's not necessarily the case that we can only reconstruct modernity from Descartes. There is a multiplicity of modernities, just as there's a multiplicities of times. This is something that Dugin also addresses, which is one of the most important things that he says, but I think you would have to take this more seriously then, which is to say that there is already a multiplicity of times and epochs at work all the time, and that what appears to be purely homogenizing, such as quote-unquote liberalism, is itself just a universalizing force, if you want to use this language, that at the same time has to particularize itself, or else it has no bearing on history. So and as it does so, it loses some of its power at the same time. So yeah, I'll leave it at that for now. More in my Heidegger course, so do come.
By paleomodernity, I'm trying to hold in using exactly the same thing, paleoliberalism, in the sense it's the empty summit, it's decentralized systems, it's decentralized social technology, and from that acceleration. And in that sense, I think all the things that now are objects of enthusiasm for accelerationists, techno-accelerationists, are the same. You know, I mean, AI is accelerating, blockchain technology.
Yeah, certain technologies are accelerating, which apparently just means that the stock market goes up, and the totally simulated value of Bitcoin goes up, which is it's very practical. These things, you know, you don't have to get all too spooky about this. Bitcoin is a great way of as a vacuum cleaner for excess money. What do you think inflation would be without these vacuum pockets? So now to be a bit more philosophical again, here's a conflation once more between the ontic and the ontological. What's ontologically going on is nothing that you. So what you have to ask is, why is time speeding up? Or is that even the case? And not look at how certain things or institutions or cars drive faster.
Technology accelerating. You know, the internet, I guess, is accelerating only in the sense that it's passing over into those things. And that's because it still is essentially on this model of decentralized systems without authoritative overcoding by some higher instance. And so on that level, I have totally not become a kind of advocate of moderation. It's only that there's a whole bunch of these other things that we mean by modernity, which I think you predominantly mean when you talk about modernity, to do that I don't think are at all liberal in any sense other than wearing it as a skin suit, to do with the hypertrophy of the state, the hypertrophy of bureaucracy, in its final phases, this woke lunacy that's the most culturally ruinous process that's ever happened in our history. And, you know, obviously, insofar as that's what one is meaning by modernity, then it's not only a question of slowing it down, but of trying to completely get off that train. So yeah, sorry to interrupt.
No, thank you very much. But it seems that you interpret yourself from the present state. So late Nick Land interprets early Nick Land by the position of late Nick Land. So thank you very much for your. So it's very important, I think, in the first stage and the last stage. Always you are very pertinent. So we could start with one point, with other point. We could get back in your thoughts. So I think that first stage that I have read your book on fanged noumena. That was a kind of I was very astonished by that. That was kind of global confirmation of traditionalist Guénonian, Evolen, Heideggerian vision of how the world ends. So the technological development, this liberation from the human presence, from the Dasein precisely, and this passage to the artificial intelligence, totally technological structures, and liberation of the core of the earth. In order to put the end to the life on the earth. That was precisely as we traditionalists, we interpret the will or the very being, very essence of the modernity. Modernity, it is Antichrist in our eyes, traditionalists.
Okay, just to be precise again, he just lumped Heidegger in with capital T traditionalism and Guénon and others. Now, Heidegger nowhere speaks of the end of the world. Heidegger wants to understand how, let's say, prophecy ultimately is, in some sense, self-prophecy. He also wants to understand certain terms like the eschaton, and how that leads to. That's one aspect that's always forgotten. I have a video on my channel, if you're interested, on Christianity and the abandonment of being, Seinsverlassenheit. Christianity is not often mentioned. It's often just pointed out that Heidegger blamed Plato for everything, which is not true. And so Heidegger does not think that the modern world is the Antichrist. I'm not sure that Dugin wanted to say this, but it could sound to someone like that. He does not say this. He actually explicitly says, this is Heidegger himself, in a conversation with Richard Visser from 1970, I have never spoken of technology as demonic. I want to understand it in its Wesen, which is not essence. Wesen is the German word that means something that is, so he understands it in a verbal sense, which is the peculiar unfolding of a domain of being, of a dimension of being, which is finite. Gestell is finite. So I'm not familiar with Heidegger believing that everything just moves towards the event, etc. That would be a misunderstanding. Das Ereignis ist die sich selbst ermittelnde Mitte. The Ereignis, a word that Heidegger says is untranslatable, so let's not translate it, is that which elicits or finds itself as the center, not the end of the world. Paragraph 34 in the Contribution to Philosophy.
So, and
it's not the eschaton, because later on, I'm not sure I'm going to find this passage, Dugin actually slips that in, and he says that the Ereignis is the eschaton. Not so.
Before you was a kind of some very brave. You were considered by us, not you were. So sorry. So you were considered by us as the most brave, most brilliant, most consequent philosopher, the thinker, who was not hesitating to give the whole picture of what is going on. So the modernity was a kind of interpreted as the kind of the will of the God's idols of Lovecraft, old ones, a kind of point of special attractor, the strange attractor that is outside. So outside of the conceptual being of humanistic culture, and this attraction, it is attracting precisely the humanity to this post-human, post-historical pole. And that description was fantastic, developed by Rezane Gerestani, and we could read something very, 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 very similar in Meyasu, in Harman. So that was confirmation of the most radical presumptions or the intuitions of the radical traditionalists. But now you rather share some moderate, conservative, multipolar attitude to what is going on. So that as well that demands the big respect. So no problem. That is much closer to our own position. But I could not get out of the difference. So there is early Wittgenstein and late Wittgenstein, totally opposite. There is Latramon or the Chant de Maldoror, the other late Maldoror of the Poésie. So we are knowing global philosophy and culture. We should be. We should be accustomed. So it is not something new, but there is very important and very interesting change in your opinion that I, with great pleasure and interest, I'm discovering just now in the online conversation.
All right, gentlemen. Well, there's a couple other topics that I think Nick had laid out there. We've already covered liberalism.
Anglo subject. That one of the things I have most problems with of your analysis of modernity and where we are and liberalism is your...
Okay, very interesting question. Where we are. When we are or where we are. So I would say this. Collingwood would be the one to turn to if you want to read this just in English. British idealist says that we are capable of taking, and you know, this is probably neither Land nor Dugin would say, but even just the question to ask, where are we, or rather, when are we? What time is this? In Heidegger, this is only possible to a certain extent because he allows for the few and the rare who are somewhat more open to the hints of being, of the Ereignis, etc., of the current epoch. But I think what's much stronger on account is Collingwood, the idea of history, that we can take ourselves out of history. I mean, in some sense, the ecstatic moment in Heidegger you could interpret in this manner as well. That there is, as Husserl says, there can be a moment of I can. So there's a moment of ecstasis, taking oneself out of a situation. But to ask the question, where are we? Spatial understanding of time, by the way. Or when are we? It requires taking oneself out of.
Is your identification of what you identify as the Cartesian subject. Because I think that this, again, the paleoliberal, the Anglo subject is almost the opposite of the Cartesian subject. I mean, it's like, if I just take the example of AI, the top-down model of artificial intelligence, Marvin Minsky, all these guys, that was in control, that was Cartesian. And the machine learning model is, I mean, I would almost say is liberal, is decentralized. You know, it's like the Cartesian model is French. Cartesian social engineering is again top down. It's completely not the empty summit. It's, you know, so I think I'm very reluctant to accept that description as being a very accurate pinpointing of the problem with the subject that you have. It seems to me, I mean, maybe the dominant subject of global liberal hegemony has become more Cartesian. I think that's extremely possible. But I think that essentially the liberal trend that has led to where we are is something that has been in competition with a Cartesian model of subjectivity and has, at least in its own mind, prevailed over that Cartesian model of subjectivity.
So, but if we consider Scotland's tradition of Reid, of Ferguson, or Hume, for example, that was a kind of rationality, individualistic rationality.
So just to clarify perhaps the distinction that's being made between Cartesian and let's say Cartesian enlightenment or subjectivity, not the same thing, but close enough. And the subjectivity, let's say, that comes out of the British Enlightenment, which is the Scottish Enlightenment. Mostly, I would assume it's Hume, who's central here. But for Hume, the self is a bundle or a heap of impressions. So there's no centrality to the self. And reason is famously the slave of the passions. And in Descartes, the logical I is self-reflective and is certain of its existence. So it is in that sense centralized and in control, let's say, of itself. Don't conflate this though with a psychological self. This is again, I would say a logical I. By which to say, if it's a logical I, this means that there are certain principles that can be deduced, not about so much perception, but about self-reflection itself, and also perception. Not perception, sorry. Self-reflection and the logic of the mind. So the distinction, to put it very crudely on my part, is between centralized, rationalistic, and self-reflective versus, which is Hume, decentralized, a bundle of impressions, and ultimately non-self-reflective and not rationalistic. So it's an interesting distinction. What Land here points out is that something that was touched on before, that there isn't perhaps just one modernity. That in fact there are different modernities competing for each other. One of them being, and so given that Dugin comes from Heidegger, it's obvious why Dugin, who follows Heidegger to a certain extent, would build everything on the Cartesian subject, as does Heidegger. To Heidegger, Cartesian Descartes is one of the moments of the rebellion of the human being against being. The human being here begins to posit what being is, and this is the sort of forms the main part of Seinsgeschichte, of the interpretation and the unfolding interpretation of being. And now, where one could take this conversation that they're having is that, and I think they're going there towards the end anyways, is that there could be other modernities. If by modernity we really just mean the current epoch and whence it came and where it might go, or to quote Land from before, where we are.
Rationality, but that was the kind of sound reason. So the reason, common reason. So common reason, it is not just something totally individual. It should correspond to something general. So I think there are just two approaches, in my opinion. So there is the universalistic approach of French continental, rationalism, and that is much more individualistic approach of Scottish and British individualism, but they come more or less, in my opinion, to the same, because there should be something common, or you could induce it from starting from your own individual position, as in the concept of common sense of Reid and Ferguson and founding fathers of the United States. That is pluralistic understanding of the something common, something general. So you construct it, something general starting from the different, divergent sometimes points, or you impose that as in Cartesian subject, strictly speaking, in the narrow sense, from the top down, as in the French tradition. I agree. So, but in my opinion, the problem is,
he doesn't say it in this way, Dugin, that is, but he says they arrive at the same, which is important. And one could, of course, point out that rationalism and irrationalism are ultimately two sides of the same coin, as not, as a direct analogy, but just to give an analogy, Bolshevism and Americanism were not ultimately that different, for other reasons, of course, than the relationship between rationalism and irrationalism, which again is why Kant is so revolutionary. He doesn't synthesize the two. He rejects them both and refutes them both.
And Cartesian subject that is closed as well. It is closed on the top. And when you try to ameliorate the situation, to save the situation, proposing to the multiplicity, to the plurality of the subjects, to make their claim on the something common, I think that you could not avoid the same Republican logic. So, in order to solve the problem of the openness, I think we should start from understanding of the human, and we need to open the rationality to something other than rationality, not by this deduction or induction. So in both cases, I think, in Cartesian, in stricto sensu, Cartesian subject or this common sense approach, we are doomed to some closed territory. So we need to open the human. We need to find a way how to make the rationality to be led to the pre-rational rational element.
So I think that this is, if not it's really one of the strongest moments from Dugin in the entire conversation. He points out something really crucial, which is that even if on the surface level there's the distinction between rationalism, empiricism, however we want to refer to these two isms, which are also just reconstructions, then the end result is the same. It's empire. And in fact, the British Empire. So just Nick Land, interestingly, becomes a patriot in this conversation quite a few times in a weird, his own peculiar way, but he does. And something that is quite striking about British conservatives, which Nick Land probably is that they assume that the British Empire just so came about. I mean, this is what they tell themselves, by spontaneous order, we took the entire planet. It was just, discombobulated, embarrassed, perplexed tradesmen who just wanted to buy some bags of tea in India and Hong Kong, who just so happened to take Singapore, and we'd rather you not. There are all these embarrassed letters you can still read to this day where all they really say is, we'd rather you not what you hadn't taken Hong Kong. This self-understanding is a part of obfuscation. It's just a very good way of hiding the truth. If you actually believe that the British Empire was built by a spontaneous order and some quirky little entrepreneurs from the shores of Albion just so happened to commit a genocide here, or whatever the word, to assume that Britain is not run top down but really bottom up is the most absurd lie that the Brits tell themselves to this day. To this day. Is one of the, if not, is it the oldest monarchy in the world, at least in the West? Everything points towards, even to this day, to the sovereign who is the monarch, who I know doesn't officially hold any power, etc., etc. But structurally speaking, it's the monarchy, and everything else underneath it is a copy, is imitation of the structure of the court. So and it's quite striking just to see this, to see Land basically become a British patriot who relates all the conservative talk, just repeats all the conservative talking points in different language. Yeah, but he sounds the same as Sir Roger Scruton about the gentleness of the British Empire, how gently they took down those villages in India, and or the gentleness with which we historicized them. We made them part of the historical dialectic, for which, by the way, Engels and Marx both praised the empire, because the empire is one of the most important forces to bring about capitalism everywhere on the planet, which means to homogenize everything. So Dugin, should be a bit more aggressive, because I'm not sure if he's getting across what he's trying to say. Dugin here actually says, you can criticize my focus on the Cartesian subject and claim that the British subject is not top down, right? It's just, we just took all these countries. Would you like to buy some tea? I've got some sugar canes here. This self-understanding is bizarre. It's beyond bizarre. To assume that we were the better angels of ourselves, who happened to run entirely by accident the biggest empire in the world, is so dishonest. Dugin apparently is too polite to point this out, but it's just completely dishonest. But because here he's actually he shows that he can also think in a profound speculative manner, and points out that what it leads to then, if those concepts universal, this other side of rationalism gets instantiated in history, it is the same result, especially actually more successful than the Cartesian subject. And then in some sense, the heap of impressions is, so when we speak of decentralized, what we still have to presuppose is the center. There's no decentralization without centralization, or without center.
That was called by phenomenologists, by Brentano, active intelligence and active intellect. So there is something that is not rational, it is pre-rational inside of us, and that is openness, that is apophatic dimension. And that could not be reduced neither to this unique Cartesian Kantian's rationality, nor to this multiplicity of the subjective individualistic rationalities, as in the Scottish version. So, in my opinion, this problem can be solved, and by the opening of the human mind to something more than human and than mind. So, and that will create the real dimension of freedom, and that will.
Yeah, as I said, just to stress this again, really the more of this Dugin, that would be good, and less of the wild associations being thrown around, which also I know is great fun. But here I mean, this is such a strong point to go into the pre-rational, even the pre-thematic. I mean, this is pure Heidegger, of course, in a sense, and open up from there towards the very openness that doesn't, let's say, center the human being. This is what, of course, Land will heavily refute, but brings in the human being in a manner that is pre-rational, or maybe perhaps not at all built on these categories that we, to some extent, have inherited as simulacra from the ancients.
Will create a kind of totally different access to organizing the society, and that will be open summit, but in different interpretation. So that is my opinion. So Cartesian subject and a strict and a narrow acceptance. I agree with you. It is much more. It matches much more the continental philosophy. But in my opinion, individualistic plurality of the reasons doesn't solve the problem. That's my opinion.
So maybe we should move on to the eschaton.
Yeah, let's move on to the eschaton with the world ends.
If there's a way of doing that without a hugely massive leap.
No, by all means, go ahead.
I mean, I always find myself in these situations wanting to get involved in extremely sort of elaborate discussion about time. And I don't know what we're like in terms of time. I mean, but I think a lot of things open up. I mean, if to start in the critical mode, which I think I can probably get sort of consensus on quite quickly, it's that whether we're looking at the biblical frame or we're looking at the critical philosophy frame, we're led in both cases to a critique of the standard commonsensical model of progressive temporality and everything that follows from that in terms of our notions of agency, our notions of historical process, our notions of the outside, and whether the actual deep influences on historical process. So, whether it's Kant saying time is a condition of possibility for objectivity, the most interesting one and complicated one by far, and therefore, if you're thinking of it as an object, that is a pre-critical metaphysical error. This is obviously something, again, that's taken through to Heidegger. Obviously, being and time is called being and time because that's stripping down the problem of transcendental philosophy to its basic elements. Or when
just to add to this briefly, being and time addresses not elements of transcendental philosophy so much, but by the Kantian revolution, what begins to be apparent to Heidegger is that the question of time is inextricably related to the question of being, which has remained unasked for 2,500 years. So Heidegger, from the beginning, responds to, in Being and Time, Plato, Aristotle, and others. He speaks of the gigantomachia peritizousias, the gigantic battle for the meaning of being. The first word of Being and Time is delon. A quote from Plato's Sophist, where Plato relates that we have become we thought we knew what we meant by the word to on, being, beings, that which is. Even that is difficult to translate to on. But we have now become perplexed. So Heidegger relates this back to the tradition. What the tradition did not pick up on. Just to add to what Land just said.
Or whether in the biblical context, we're talking about what is summarized as providential history of what is meaned as trust the plan, on what is a time organized by the eschaton, so that the notion of common, ordinary human agency as something that is basically affecting a causal process from the present on the future, and therefore will bring about whatever future is volitional for those subjects, that they're in a position where basically how the future turns out is being decided now by us. That's obviously theologically and critically disrupted by these two frames, and so I guess that's a lot of this is very relevant to the discussions that we're having about history, what is happening in history. It cannot simply be the case that at a certain point in history, certain mistakes were made that led to bad things happening. It's like that is a kind of, there's an element that is inescapable from that, but that simply can't be the story, because that is a sort of secular history story that is inconsistent with any sophisticated understanding of time. So that seems to me to be the kind of introduction to maybe a phase of conversation.
So first of all, I would.
Yeah, very, very good again from Land. He points out that to summarize and maybe oversimplify, which is always a bit not the best thing, but I'll just try and summarize it. He points out that the assumption of progressivism, that it's purely the volition of the human being as a perfectly autonomous subject that is able to generate the future, is interrupted by, for example, divine providence. So the the notion that we are in charge of our destiny, and that we, or of course also that we made grave mistakes, and hence this has led here. Utopia and dystopia are never too far away from each other. They're usually the same. But so whichever approach you have, this would be interrupted, for example, by divine providence. And I think what he's getting at, as I might translate it, is that the human being isn't solely in charge. But I would perhaps against Land, if I understand him correctly, point out that, or stress that, even though the human being isn't in charge, that doesn't mean the human being is either irresponsible or is not also, let's say, an agent. The deed matters. Remember, in the beginning was the deed.
I would like to say that I have dedicated to the problem of time 47 lectures and 2 volumes. It will be published soon. And so I thought many years about that, as you. First of all, I think that according to my exploration of the metaphysics of time, I have come to the conclusion that there are many types of times. So there is not only one time. So we have Christian time, we have biblical time, we have Iranian time, modern time, historical time, Newtonian absolute time, that has nothing to do with the progress. So that is much more entropical. So in Newtonian physical time, it was united by evolutionary.
So Herder, who was a student of Kant, wrote the original Metacritic, the Metacritique of the Critique of Pure Reason, in which Herder concludes that, or explains how and why, time is not homogeneous, as Kant says, and has Kant in some sense reduces time and space both to parameters, forms of intuition that are homogeneous. But then instead there are at once and all the time uncountable times. This is more or less what Dugin here says. But this again means that when we ask the question, where are we? When are we? We are always dealing with this multiplicity of times and hence also epochs, non-unitary time, non-homogeneous time. This is what this implies. We have to take it seriously. There is not just one, let's say, quote unquote, modernity. And hence, to me, the task is, not just the plan, but if there is divine providence, just to come at this from Giambattista Vico, for example, then we don't have insight into this, and simply leaning back and trusting it doesn't suffice. I mean, you do realize with, politically, for example, what this implies, but at the same time, you have to, what the human being has to do, who is in time, who is temporal and historical, the human being has to reconstruct, because again, history is not just data points, one thing after another, is we have to tell the story. And as we do so, that opens up horizons in the future. Now, what they're getting at here is that the eschaton orders time or times, which is the future orders time, and or the future has, as Nick Land also puts it more provocatively, the future has already happened, and is causing the past.
Theory and Bergson's idea they put them together. But originally, Newtonian time has nothing of kind of amelioration of the quality of conditions. So that is just continuation of the mechanical laws. So in modern science, in modern physics, in classical physics, there is one time, Newtonian time. On the social level, in the modernity, there is totally different time. In the history before them, in the Christian Middle Ages, that was different time. So we have the plurality of time, of times. And first of all, there is the time with the eternity. That's Plato's on Aristotle as well. Aristotelian time is the time that is moving around the eternity. There is the eternity center, and there is a kind of movement outside of it. So the rotation outside, and that is totally different time. That is just reflection of eternity. That has nothing special in it. There is no history. There is just repetition of the same as maybe as an Indian vision. So there are cultures, a civilization without time at all. So time is as well depends on the civilization. So what we are dealing with, it is a kind of Iranian time, Zoroastrian time, where there is the line, there is the process, and that is explained in the Zoroastrian tradition by the existence of the absolute evil and absolute good. And only existence of absolute evil makes the history something meaningful. So without that, that will be just the play. But if there are the real fight, so who will win, the god of evil or god of good? So that makes the history something really that does matter. And that was accepted by Christianity, maybe by after Babylonian, post-Babylonian Judaism as well, that as preparation for Christianity. So we have inherited, we Christians, we have inherited this Zoroastrian time, historical time, with open ends, and coming to from the top to the bottom. So that is declining time. So the time that is going from the paradise to the hell. And in that sense, I have recently discovered your concept, Mr. Land, about generative wretches. So there is something in this linear time seen from Ahrimanic, from evil point of view, as some degenerative wretched, something that you could not reverse. You could not return the tradition because you are obliged to get only one way down. So that is a kind of attraction of the pole of Antichrist in the history. But the end of this degenerative wretched, as you have pointed out as well, could not be achieved coming back because there is no way. This linear time is metaphysical time, is very important time. So, but we need to not to reverse this line, but we need to say no to this process, to this modernity, to this trajectory, to this orientation. We could say no, and we could make an effort to deny the logic of this unilateral orientation. That is spiritual eschatological revolution. And I think, speaking about Eschaton, we are approaching the point when the result of the negative elements of the history are assembled. So we are approaching the point of absolute night, the midnight. And Heidegger.
I wonder if what I'm hearing is doing justice to Dugin, but he's beginning to understand history as just the results of certain actions by the human being, and he leaps a bit from Plato's understanding of time and also this different understanding of history in the continuum of the cosmos, as opposed to what he doesn't mention, but the revolution of time by the incision of Christ into time. He mentions Zoroastrian time. That's something I can't really speak intelligently on, so I won't. I'll just take his word for it. But he now introduces the eschaton, as you can hear, and if I'm not mistaken, the way what I've heard so far here is that the eschaton is the result, the end result of human action thus far, and hence there's a need to say no. Now, one could perhaps point out that to a certain extent, we, especially as the understanding of time is to a large extent linear, that one has to posit an end of time simply as a horizon against which an epoch even begins to appear. So that would be the same as saying the world has to end from time to time so that you see it. So the philosophical, to me at least, what seems to be relevant is that Dugin now posits the eschaton to begin to see something. But he then also takes it very seriously, in the sense that he does see himself as living in the end times.
Was very attentive to that.
Which, by the way, does have political, at least, ramifications.
Once he said, we are already in the midnight. Oh no, not yet, not yet. There is the kind of some smallest element, some distance, smallest distance that separates us still. Not yet in the midnight. So we are approaching the midnight, and the concept of a schatten.
What comes after midnight? Or to quote an anecdote from Heidegger's family, Heidegger used to say to his wife towards the end of his life, es rast alles auf den Abgrund, so everything's racing towards the abyss. And she asks him, and what's underneath the abyss? But if you take the word Abgrund, the ground, the ground that's withdrawing, not just the abyss, as it's translated into English usually, but Abgrund, the ground that withdraws itself, then Heidegger himself, even if he says somewhere, he talks about the midnight, etc., it might be in the Black Notebooks. I'm not too familiar with those, so I don't really care. Because, one has to be careful also with the endless amount that Heidegger has written. At some point, there's simply, it's just notes. I mean, if you're someone who takes a lot of notes, not everything that you note down has validity or matters or has anything to do with the actual thought. So let's say even if Heidegger says that we're not yet in the midnight, it's coming, then Heidegger is not a thinker of linear time in any respect. Linear time is the vulgar understanding of time. It's just an interpretation of time. Ecstatic temporality is what he's after. And the later Heidegger, time not only has 3 dimensions, which is having been, present, and future, but is four-dimensional, that which withdraws.
Is precisely like that, because inside of immanent version of it, so the time will never end. Because if you are in total solidarity with the time going down, it will last forever. It is the eternity of the hell. So you are going down, 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 and that has no end. And if we would say stop here, so if we have enough, so let's stop it. So we have achieved the midnight, the point of midnight. It is about not yet, as happened. It is about how we consider the situation we are in. So already or not yet. So it is not objective element of historical time. It is a kind of metaphysical judgment to it. And if we say, so we have enough, so it is midnight. Just now, right now, is one point. If we say, oh, not yet, we didn't explore the other forms of transgender culture. We need more technological devices. We need more body positive women. So
I'm not following. I don't know how you go from the eschaton to body positivity and transgender stuff. Perhaps just to, turn it to something more relevant. Heidegger says, for example, in Was heißt denken, what calls for thinking, that we do not yet think, and that this is the most thought-worthy. He doesn't say that, you idiots, you're not thinking yet. Why is no one thinking? No, this is to say that thinking is only just beginning. What does he say, Heidegger? What does he say? Das Ende der Philosophie und der Anfang des Denkens oder der Auftrag des Denkens. The end of philosophy is getting late. And the mandate of thinking. Well, let's just go with this my misquote, which is the Anfang des Denkens. So the Anfang, so the catching of thinking. For Heidegger, thinking is only just beginning, because philosophy as a discipline has found its telos in, as he says, in cybernetics. So it's now just turning around itself. But that means at the same time that thinking begins to twist free. So there's never just an eschaton from which everything monocausally and backwards is being caused. No. Gestell, in some sense, holds the greatest chance for the turn within it, precisely because of its attempt to concentrate what can't be concentrated, can't be challenged forth. So again, he almost had a complete thought here and then went somewhere else. So here again, let us just rather look at what a thinker says and tries to say, then try and see in just random examples. Because in some sense, what they're doing is just be accountants of decline. But that's easy.
We don't have enough, so we need to progress further. So it is not yet. So that is, but it is not in the objective structure of time when we achieve or not achieve yet the point of escape. Is my vision. So I've tried to explain it.
I mean,
about politicians who have a vision. He said they should go see the special doctors. So I know they're not politicians, but I think one should be really careful with the word vision.
obviously the way you're talking about this confirms the fact that there's the question of agency and the philosophy of time are completely interconnected in a way that if you're talking seriously about one, you move over onto the other. And so I'm sort of wondering about this thing. When you say we say no, I mean, obviously there is a reading of what that means that would be, it would be the most kind of idolatrous mode of humanistic subjectivity and the most unsustainable.
The most idolatristic mode mode of being, then, according to Nick Land, is also what he does, which is just to say yes to the plan. Whatever the plan is, which apparently just means whatever currently happens, or whoever currently holds power, let's not forget, is being idolized by Nick Land, let's not forget, by saying yes to it and just trusting the plan as it, quote unquote, just so happens to unfold. To insinuate, as Nick Land here does without being explicit, that time or temporality precludes freedom or free acts is absurd. It's absurd, but that's what he does. Which puts him in a very neat position for those who can't, don't hear this. Which is he gets to idolize the plan, and he gets to idolize his phlegmatic subjectivity. Here's my label for you, by the way, phlegmatic subjectivist. Then you exclude yourself from any sense of responsibility. And I say specifically sense, not even being responsible. I say sense of responsibility, by having idolized the plan, which refutes your entire argument, Mr. Land, of the entire debate. So no, I don't think that he's necessarily satanic. Even, that label is, to me, irrelevant. He's just self-refuting. But he's self-refuting with an agenda, which is to tell people nothing ever happens, bro. It's the idolization of the plan trademark. Not a good Catholic.
Notion of progressive time, where time is moving forward, we're moving it forward. The way it moves forward is in some fundamental sense our decision, and there's not historical structure that is organizing the decisions in any way that we make. And it seems to me, because I know that you appeal to the language of eschatology, and I'm assuming with that you are invoking the entire theological framework of time that's relating time to eternity through eschaton, and complicating agency through providence, through angels. So what I'm trying to say is,
now we would need Ryan Hecker to join this, to talk to us about angels, a topic that philosophically I have tried to avoid, and yeah, I'll leave it at that.
Are you not a little bit worried that this sort of decisionistic claim could be misunderstood? very much and fall below the level of sort of critical transcendental philosophy or sort
Okay, no, sorry. Why would that fall beneath the level of critical transcendental philosophy? Can someone enlighten me? The whole point of the critique of pure reason is that that reason is capable of critiquing itself and be critiqued. That is a moment of freedom. It is a decision, a cut with its previous or hitherto, let's say, unfolding. If the Kritik der reinen Vernunft is a genitives subjectivus, then it's reason itself that critiques itself. Probably it's both an objective and a subjective genitive. So it's being critiqued and it's critiquing itself. Now that's a decision in the proper sense of the word. But it's also a moment of freedom. Because the human being, and this is what two thinkers of history should actually also address, which they never do. German historicism is not mentioned. Dilthey is not mentioned. Heidegger's the scope of science is not mentioned. Hegel's philosophy of spirit in history is not mentioned. What Hegel means by freedom in history, etc. None of this is mentioned. It's simply, for some reason, Nick Land here insinuates that by introducing decision, it falls below the great level of a critical transcendental philosophy, which apparently, again, is just an apologia for phlegmatism.
Sort of biblical framing that I think
the point of the biblical framing, Mr. Land, is that the human being falls from grace and in so doing becomes free.
you want to invoke.
So, thank you. When I'm speaking about the decision, so I don't rely on the capacity of the human person to get rid totally from influence or to decide the logic of history. There is something that is much more than us. But I think that the problem of time, it is as well a kind of intervening times existing in our heart. So we could every moment go this way or the other way inside of us, not on the superficial of our existence. So inside.
So this is quite interesting what Dugin says. I find it very good. And just to come back to Land. Now, given that he's a good Kantian, he will, of course, be familiar with Kant's religion within the boundaries of mere reason contra idolatry, as Nick Land keeps yapping on about here, right? What does Kant say here? The transcendental philosopher, above all, is that the human being is free to arrange the incentives, the Triebfedern. So, let's just say to which form his character, which inform his actions, etc. This takes place in a noumenal act, which is to say, in an act, also the language of Fenk, noumena, all of this is just images. So the noumenal act, which is to say, it's outside natural law, physics, any sort of interference with even the social also. So the human being is in that sense free, and then comes back. It's a non-temporal act. That's transcendental philosophy. That's a decision, Mr. Land. And you just insinuated to confuse your interlocutor that in transcendental critical philosophy this isn't possible. Now you have turned the philosopher of freedom, Kant, into a what? A plan truster? That's not appropriate. And I think Land knows better. But he might assume that those who listen to him don't know better, because they don't know Kant to the level that he does, certainly does.
Inside of us, there are two times: the time of angels and the time of the history, of this wretched, or this degenerative wretched. So being human, in my opinion, we are absolutely free. We are free as gods. We are free as God. So, but we are not omnipotent as God, but we are free exactly at the same level.
I would say that we're even more, so if he relates to the Olympians here, I don't know what gods he has in mind, then we are in some sense even freer than the gods, because the gods are, well, they are without currency. They have no weight. They need the human being. The human being is the free being in Eleutheria. So, I mean, he's jumping around a bit, but granted, it's already 2 hours. So, by the way, let me just point out, people have just tuned in. Head over to the enrollment page for my course on Heidegger on technology. We begin next week. Now is the time to enroll. Yeah. If you want to understand our time, our epoch, Heidegger's writings on technology and the turn are indispensable. So now, if you've been listening now for 2.5 hours, some of you, if you want to get serious on your philosophical study and an approach to what is today, then take this course. There are 3 different tiers. The first one is self-study, which is ideal for you if you don't want to be in the seminars or don't have time for the seminars. Most people take the philosophical fellowship, which is live Zoom seminars. There will be 6 seminars, 3 intense weekend seminars. You get access to 6 video lectures. You can see how long they are here. First one is 76 minutes and 85 minutes. So we're going to read the question concerning technology. Then we're going to read this conversation with the Japanese visitor on language and the technological Europeanization of the world. What kind of colonizing force this is. And also Heidegger's text on science and reflection, where he relates how theory structures actuality. And the final 2 seminars are devoted to the turn and how we can establish a free relationship with techniques. So, it's less chic, perhaps, than all this talk about the eschaton and the end of the world, but slightly more serious. We do want to understand what is, but we also want to be close to the thinker and not get swept away in a multiplicity of replaceable ideologies. So let's continue here for a bit more.
As himself. So the God who creates everything. We are not. We could not do what we want. We are not omnipotent, but we are free. The freedom is a kind of divine element of us. So we could be in solidarity of the time that goes in different way, in different direction. So we could get to the river in every moment that brings us to the different ocean, to the different sea. So that is this decision that affects us, but it could affect as well the whole ontology. And beside or outside this degenerative wretched that's coming only down, we could choose the way to not to be solidary with.
So I've never heard of this, the degenerative wretched that Land apparently puts forth. But what Dugin here quite neatly, and he should have been perhaps a bit more explicit and also accusatory, I would say, points out to Land is that he fails again, even just the most basic dialectics, to appreciate that. As I said before, if you want to be decentral, you have to presuppose the center. Be very careful, just in general, just as a hint. Maybe maybe currently it's dawning on some people who aren't complete idiots what Bitcoin, there's no coin. Have you noticed it? The decentralized monetary alternative to the monetary system really is, which is the crudest centralization of power, which will be used as CBDCs. The same technology will be used. Either whether this was intended or not doesn't matter so much, because it's inbuilt in the simplest dialectic itself. So Dugin here quite strongly, and I don't think that Land really responds to it, because either he doesn't pick up or he doesn't want to. If Land proposes the wretched, degenerative, whatever this is supposed to be, then there's also regeneration. You cannot just have degeneration. This monodirectional representing of time that Land always employs is simplistic. It's an extremely simplistic view of history that then he obfuscates by all these random associations between Kant's transcendental philosophy and the biblical framework. He's literally just saying it's all over, forget it. This is all hurling towards the eschaton. Another, 25 years ago that wasn't en vogue. Now we can talk about the eschaton. So very good here from Dugin to point out to Land that he should check his not privileges but his presuppositions
with that. And there is ontological possibility included in that, in us, because the real nature of time doesn't.
Also, so Dugin just speaks of possibility. It's very important that, again, possibility is such a strong notion because it's not potential. There's not potential very often really just has a couple of directions towards energeia, but possibility is open. So in any degeneration, there is, if at the very least, the possibility for regeneration, if not even the necessity for it. And of course, the Land won't have that, because what Land wants to avoid, and he doesn't give good reasons for this. Philosophically speaking, he doesn't. He just says you fall below the level of blah, 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 of the plan. Trust the plan. Well, let's just say this. Trust the plan and let those, and these are people who drive history, just do their thing. I mean, I didn't know that Nick Land was a Q-tard.
Coincide with this scientific,
which is actually sad, because not the worst philosopher ever to walk the earth. I mean, in terms of his philosophical grasp of speculation.
Capitalist, modernist, technological, modern, linear time. There is the dimension of the eternity embedded in time. It's very difficult to discover. It is very difficult to find, but it exists. It is hidden. It is not absence. And the vision or the kind of absence of it. It is just the cover. So if we discover the entrance inside of us, of our heart, we could find the way and the access to the other time, the authentic time.
Yeah.
The time linked to the eternity, angelical time.
Wow.
And this time...
Now he's losing me a bit here with eternal time and angelic time. It's that's not that's my failure to see what he's saying, to understand what he's saying here. But everything else up until this point, I would sign off. Very strong here again from Dugin, I think, in this debate, pointing out to Mr. Land that he's just writing an apology for the powers that be. And, those could be demonic powers and forces. It doesn't matter. There is no story to tell without human freedom. So Land will get to this, to the contrast or the battle between necessity and freedom, either because of the nature of this debate or because he doesn't want to go there. He doesn't mention Schelling. Ultimately, the entire tradition of German idealism tries to articulate the relationship between necessity and freedom. Okay, I'll stay a bit longer and then off we go. But in the meantime, kids, sign up. Get enrolled in my course on Heidegger, which starts next week. Or, if you'd rather, take my course on Kant. If you are actually serious, if you really want to understand what's going on in these debates, you have to get serious on philosophy. Don't just listen to them as content, because these are serious thinkers and they have something to tell us. But you need to get to work. It's not enough to say he's Deleuzian, he's not Kantian, as someone says here in the chat. That's not the point, mate. It's not the point. Whether it's this Ian or that ism or that he has certainly read Kant, and he certainly understood Kant, and that is the point. Because Nick Land built so much of his own philosophy on transcendental idealism. So you have to understand what that actually is. And don't worry about the labels. That's not thinking. You're just doing nothing. It doesn't matter whether someone is this ism or that ism. That's never the point. You've said nothing. If you do this, you have said nothing. Stop doing this to yourself. Stop doing it to others. It destroys the discourse, everything. Oh, I think he's a Fichtean. Oh, I think he's a Spenglerian. Oh, I think he's Heideggerian. Says nothing, means nothing. What matters is the thought.
Is a radical contradiction with the time we're living in. So that is a kind of revolutionary time, a time of spiritual transfiguration, and that is not mystical. That is not about some individual or subjective experience. That is something critical. And I think when Heidegger spoke about the time as the future, because according to Heidegger, interesting, the time is going from the future to the past, not from the past to the future.
No. It sounds like it. So okay, to be fair, that's one way of reading it, but it's a bit more difficult. There are different dimensions of time, and having been, if you just stay with being in time, having been das Gewesene, so there's a continuous Anwesen, that's to say there's a continuous presence of that which has been, not the past, but that which has been. Listen to my English here, yeah? What am I trying to say in English? That which I have been reading. I have been reading, I have been doing this, I have been blah, 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 blah. So the fact is that if that which has been, in some sense, lingers on, then this is actually, as Heidegger says, so it's not the future that causes the past, as Dugin here insinuates. Instead, that which has been pushes into that which is to come, and that which is to come is its own dimension, and these two together generate the presence. So it's not just the future into the that causes the past, as Dugin here says.
Future. He is dealing in Sein und Zeit and his time and being with totally different concept. The time coming from the future into the past, as well as Aristotle, the same, because entelechia, taking the telos, the goal inside, it is precisely that gives the totally different ontological dimension for the history of the being. So we are attracted by both poles, by the pole of this doom, of negative, demonic time. It is how I interpret your degenerative wretched, or the end of history of Genon, or kingdom of the quantity of Genonian. So that is.
So because Marin is just mentioning the horizon in the chat, what's the horizon? You can't reach it. One of the most audacious things ever uttered by a contemporary mythological figure, which is of course Jack Sparrow, is "Bring me that horizon," which can't be brought. The horizon is never available, never itself present, and yet affords the entirety of beings, in a sense, or the entirety of the appearance of beings. The eschaton, ladies and gentlemen, has got not much to do with the horizon, but let's just metaphorein, let's just carry this over analogically. The eschaton does not make itself available. Just as the Antichrist cannot be seen in the world. I mean, that Peter Thiel, who is, a salesman, who is apparently run out of good ways of selling his tech that doesn't work, that he now has to resort to calling Greta Thunberg the Antichrist, and actually finds Christian theologians frankly dumb enough to, or maybe, I don't know, corrupt enough because they want to have a nice dinner. So by the way, the Antichrist, I mean, so Dante, have you heard, may have heard of him? Lucifer has no being. Why is why is the Antichrist called Antichrist? Because it's just anti. There's no being there. It's the mere antithesis. Hence, you cannot rareify that and try and see it manifest in the world in DEI. So again, Peter Thiel is a salesman. Libertarianism is dead. So how can he sell the newest nonsense he's trying to sell, Palantir? Well, apparently this is what they came up with in their strategy sessions for whatever reason. Now, if Peter Thiel does this, which has, tremendously, and Aleksandr Karp, we shouldn't forget, of course, either, they have, that has detrimental effects on the world, right? Because they wreak havoc with their awful, awful technology. But we should not expect two philosophers who are presented to us as the greatest thinkers alive amongst them, Land and Dugin, to make the very same mistake as a tech bro who knows not what he says or thinks or is. You do not reify the eschaton. Do not try to possess it, hold it, or make it available to yourself or to anything.
That is a kind of pole of attraction, of subhuman, infracorporeal attraction. There is one side, and we are going precisely there. Welcome to hell. We are already there. So, and there is the kind of other fluid, other direction inside of time, and inside of the same time, the very same time, and we discover that we could grasp it in a moment. So there is totally different history. We are changing the direction of the history, not on the subjective way, but in a general, in an integral way. That is about what is a point of attraction to us in the future, and that is Heideggerian concept. So, eschaton, according.
Well, I didn't know there were concepts in Heidegger. Oh well.
To Heidegger was Ereignis, the event. So if we are attracted by the event, we are fighting with in the same camp as the angel.
So oh God. Okay, listen to this.
For the end of time, because there is a fight.
So the Ereignis, or the event, as he says, is attracting us, and that's the eschaton. Again, Heidegger says, in the Contributions to Philosophy, that the Ereignis is what? Ist die sich selbst ermittelnde Mitte. That doesn't sound like the eschaton, does it? Now, Heidegger also says about the Ereignis that it is the realm, and this is explicitly an explicit quote. Heidegger says the Ereignis is the realm in which being and the human being encounter each other. Der Satz der Identität, the principle of identity, the leap of identity, to be very close to Heidegger. Doesn't sound like the eschaton to me. How does he draw out the Ereignis in Gesamtausgabe number 71? Oh, he says the following. He says, the Ereignis is that which, coming into its own, loses itself. Coming into its own, disappearing. Appearing, disappearing in one. So there is no eschaton, no end of the world in this manner. It's quite the opposite. It means that there's clearing for self-concealment. That there is no availability without non-availability. No appearance without disappearance. No coming to be without loss at once. So Dugin has not understood das Ereignis. Now, to be a bit mean, that precludes him from, or excludes him, sorry. Really, it's a very exclusive club. He's not in it. It excludes him from okay, this is so dumb. I have to block you. I'm so sorry, but this is so dumb. The devil is real. You can see him in the way certain people act. So the Ereignis is the realm in which the being and the human being meet. So it's epochal. Yeah, and what this epoch has to be is it has to come into its own. The realm of techniques has to come into its own. This is what we're going to discuss at my course. Yeah. So sign up now. Why? Because in Heidegger, you don't find a reactionary. You don't find a capital T traditionalist. The link to enroll is in the description of this video. So, and also in the live chat. So, what Heidegger does is he points us to the fact that we have to lead being as the shepherd of being. We have to lead being to what is its true domain or main dimension in this epoch, and hence to bring about the overturning from within, which is not bringing about the end of the world or anything like that, but which is to not even overcome a certain epoch, but to actually be in it firmly and fully, because that is what will allow it to see there is never just one epoch. There's a chiaroscuro always in place. Okay, but that he then Dugin brings in angels, I really find rather extraordinary.
Fight about the end of time.
No, so what he does, this is really, it's kind of cute because, it's almost like someone who's dabbling in all kinds of, oh, there's this word by Heidegger, and then there's this, then there's angels over here. And what happens when I bring the two together? Oh, nothing makes sense anymore, but I can say everything at the same time, and no one criticizes me because I happen to be Dugin. You can there are no angels in Heidegger. There are no angels in philosophy for a reason. What their theological status is, that's debatable. And now you could say that perhaps Heidegger, yes, he does speak about hints and messages. So maybe that's what he means by the angelic. But no, that's not what he says. It's not a metaphor. Dugin says that there's a battle for the end of the world, and that this somehow has to do with the Ereignis.
Because there are two opposite interpretations of the end of time. We are approaching it anyway, but interpretation.
Oh, good. So he knows we're approaching it anyway. That's good to know.
Differs. Not the same, the very moment. The moment is common, but interpretations are opposite. So that is a kind of to be on the side of the angels, not on the side of the demon, in the moment of the last judgment. And that depends from our free will, from our freedom.
Wouldn't you much rather be on the side of the demons, though? I mean, isn't Mephistopheles, was not a demon, but still so much more fun than those three self-possessed, narcissistic archangels in the prologue in heaven to come back to Goethe's Faust? I mean, at least Mephistopheles has, an existential dimension to him.
I mean, that's all.
No, Lan's reaction is absolutely priceless here, of course.
Very interesting. I'm not 100% sure I'm entirely grasping everything.
Okay, if you've never been to Britain or have not been around them, when I first moved there, which is now a long time ago, I just thought everyone's so polite. I mean, look at how he's very disturbed, isn't he? He just has no idea what was just being said. I mean, he's just too polite to say. But actually, what he really just said, very rather interesting, but I'm not entirely grasping what he basically says. You've lost it, mate. That's a very polite way of saying, but that's what he's just saying. Just so if you're not familiar with their ways, you wouldn't perhaps pick up on it. But he's just saying to him, okay, you've not just lost me, you've lost it, the plot.
That you're saying that. I mean, you definitely, there's lots of different elements to what you're saying that I think all maybe would be great to tease apart. I mean, at one level, there's the question of the multiplicity of times that I take is in a way a restatement actually of the multiplicity of Daseins. I mean, for Heidegger, to be extremely crude about it, I mean, Dasein basically is time.
Yes, and time is finite, so that's what Heidegger also says. We shouldn't, however, then conflate this with the end of the world or with an eschaton. It's to say that the openness, because Dasein is not the human being, it's the being of the human being. That's to say the ways in which the presence being lets beings be present. There's a finite openness to that, which is what Dasein is.
And so if you're pluralizing Daseins, you are pluralizing temporalities, and
Yeah.
you know, that's a very interesting and persuasive move.
Yeah, so
I don't.
Land is coming back to something else here, which is more fruitful. And as I said, I wouldn't necessarily want to multiply Dasein. One could rather say that, so in terms of Daseins that have specific characteristics, but one would have to say that Dasein is always already, in a sense, unfolding as a multiplicity. So there are always already different ways of the adverbial going towards the verb being. I know this sounds awkward perhaps, but a very crude way of saying is it's not perspectivism, it's not how we perceive the world as if the world were there, but there's just a multiplicity of temporal worlds and ultimately ways of being, that all, however, interrelate in Dasein, not as a universal, but as a structurality that allows any sort of encounter between the languages, for example. So this is just basic Heidegger in Being and Time. Not even going to Seinsgeschichte or the Ereignis. But the Ereignis, again, is peculiar and to the Occident.
Thinking through exactly what the implications of that would be is complicated. And then there's the question, obviously, of which, when I was trying to work out notes for this whole discussion, it came up in a lot of different forms, which is the basic, I think, metaphysical contradiction, the tension, the paradox of our religious tradition, one extremely germane to this, as we've seen just from what you're saying, but could for sure have seen before that, is about whatever language we choose, like libertarianism in its theological sense, metaphysical freedom, free will, volition, and necessity, ananke, destiny, fate. And it seems to me that problem is, and it's hard to find exactly the right word, I think it's not even just a paradox, because it's not that one side necessity is right. It's not the other, that libertarianism is just right. It's not that it's simply a paradox either. It's a motor. I mean, I think the fact we have history, the fact we have the history of religion, but history in general.
So Land is bringing the whole thing back again to notions that that let's just say, more relevant, which he's now getting into the, let's just put it simply, the dialectic or the relationship between necessity and freedom.
Is because that thought, trying to understand the relationship between freedom and necessity, is something that is not resolvable now on either pole, and neither can it just be dismissed as something that is irresolvable in principle and has no dynamic force. It's in a way the driver of religious innovation and the movement of history. And the kind of very sad thing about secular modernity, I mean probably a lot, is the fact that it has so pitifully failed to maintain the tension of this. You know, it's basically, it has just resolved to have a complete system of necessitarianism and a complete system of metaphysical freedom, and treated as if there's no contradiction between them, no problem. So if you're talking about physics, you're a necessitarian. If you're talking about economics and incentives and all of that, you're a volitionalist, libertarian. And you have these two completely incompatible frames running simultaneously. And you think that somehow by doing that, by being in a state of constant, extreme contradiction that is not even being explored, you have made some advance upon the Middle Ages. I mean, it's an extremely weird thing. And so, you know, when you invoke freedom, extreme freedom that is the freedom of God without the omnipotence of God, I see yourself relating to that problem. And
it's so polite.
You know, I guess I would say, you know, I guess I'd say it's complicated because on the other hand,
so let's just perhaps appreciate what Land just said, is that where quote unquote modernity goes wrong, or perhaps just not so much modernity, because we have examples of necessity and freedom being thought together, most prominently certainly Schelling. As I mentioned before, the entirety of German idealism is driven by this to a large extent, and most explicitly definitely in Schelling. So we see a reduction in recent times of just a separation of two different domains. That, so Kant, by the way, just to mention this, Kant wants to be a good Newtonian, but at the same time retain human freedom, as I said before, so that there's perfect causality in nature, but we are in the capacity to initiate new causal chains from within, quote unquote, the noumenal, in a noumenal act, that's to say an act outside time and space, not anything spookier than that. You know, it's not another world, anything. So this is I think a very important remark here by Land. But I wonder the degree to which, and I may be misrepresenting some things he says somewhere else, but the question whether we can simply accelerate a way out of this, if that's even what he implies or intends, is perhaps not enough, and instead I would perhaps not say, you know, well, that's one of the things you often hear is we need to get back to this and the other. We need to do this again. We need to remember that we forgot about that. No. Instead, why is this reduction happening? So that one and the other, necessity and freedom, get separated out so much. What is this ode to? And so what I think what this is owed to, in a way, it comes back to an extent to the Cartesian issue, which is the beginning of that modernity, which is the predominant modernity, the predominant trajectory, but not the only one, which is to separate the subject from historical phenomena, so that what matters most is that that we separate the realm of freedom from the realm of physics, and that's the beginning of quote unquote modernity anyways. So instead of trying to correct it or reclaim something, you simply pick up somewhere else. You begin again somewhere else. You begin again. That's the other beginning. So the new beginning, that Heidegger says, is an other beginning. And that beginning is possible at any time.
There's freedom and there's also necessity. And it's like, if the claim to freedom is such that it seems to actually be extinguishing the question of necessity, in theological terms, extinguishing providence, extinguishing the eschaton, extinguishing, depending how the argument is set up, the omniscience of God, then that's not going to be a sustainable. That's an over radicalized or over one-sided commitment that is going to require balancing within a dynamic paradox, within a mystery, the other side of the equation.
So interesting. So the problem is, I think, that's where we have the point of freedom. So if there is, that is about where we.
But at least Dugin got land to admit that there is freedom.
Where we situate the point of the freedom. So if we think it is in the normal subject, in the human subject, there is no freedom at all, because it is totally controlled, formatted as hard disk. It is just program. So a normal human is just program inside of operational system, nothing else. That is here is some kind of destiny. So destiny of the updating the operational system. So there that is, and we could follow that trace through the history. So, but in that sense, in order to define where the freedom is, I have developed many years ago the concept of radical subject. Maybe you're acquainted.
Yes, yeah.
So that is something that appears, that manifests when all the form of subjectivity of human being is taken out. It is, and when the human,
and that this is quite astonishing, as we shall learn in a bit, because the thinker, the forward-thinking thinker of the fourth political theory that is based on a multiplicity of Daseins, which in brackets doesn't exist. Dasein, which is not a subject at all, and Heidegger's declared nemesis, is Cartesian subjectivity. So this very thinker called Dugin now proposes the radical subject, which, as we shall see in a second, is even more Cartesian than the Cartesian subject.
Becomes a total slave. So it's just the algorithm. So when everything in us, inside of our reason, mind, psychology, bodies, everything is controlled by some outer power of society, of the state, of something, of the cathedral, and so on, by the republic. And when you have...
You see what he does? You see, he he now says that so the whole point of Heidegger is that Dasein is always already in an interrelationality with others. To say Dasein means to say being with others. And to Dugin, apparently now, this just shows you that he's not thought about any of this, really. He hasn't thought it through. He has not, for someone who keeps talking about the eschaton, he has, in fact, not ever thought anything through to the end, has he? Because if he had, he would see what he's actually suggesting here. A subject so radical, so barren, really, that everything has been stripped from it. Any relationality to anything.
Have the illusion to be free. So it is not yet accomplished. So you need to pass through the extreme experience of having nothing at all.
Interesting.
By yourself, as in totalitarian, an extreme totalitarian system. We were there during Soviet time. You are entering that, or maybe you are already something very comparable, because modern days, liberal dictatorship is something very, very close. So you have no right to think otherwise than you are obliged to do. So that is a kind of expropriation of your inner self. So you have nothing inside. Everything is...
So now he's making an appeal to the listeners that they are not finding their authentic self in liberal democracies. That's literally just the pitch right now.
It's dictated by political correctness, by cancel culture.
So and these words, political correctness, cancel culture, maybe the next one is wokeness.
So you are totally cancelled.
No, not wokeness, but he does mention cancel culture. What's that? Those are trigger words. They're just trigger words that shut down thought. I mean, it's an ingenious rhetorical move, but it's just dishonest. It's just extremely dishonest. And, again, for someone who keeps yapping on about the eschaton, maybe, Mr. Dugin, it's time for you to think something through to its end. That's what we always do. We human beings think from the end backwards. That's your eschaton. That's not the end of the world. That's not the apocalypse. But it's a good idea for anyone who claims publicly to be a philosopher and who makes such an impact for some reason in the West, even though you want to destroy the West, to not even be able, and I'm sorry that I just for splitting my infinitive here, but not even make the effort of trying to understand Dasein appropriately, accurately, and then go on and do what? And propose the radical subject, which is more Cartesian than the Cartesian subject.
Your subjectivity is totally cancelled and given to you after the process of the cleaning. So you should be that. So we passed by that. That is why I am speaking so easily about that. We passed by totalitarian experience, Soviet time, and now it is totalitarian experience of liberal time. So you are repeating the same experience. But what is important, when there is nothing, when there is nothing inside you, only totalitarian state, purging everything, cleansing everything inside, you come sooner or later, or maybe you don't come, but it could be possible to come to some core or something inside of human being that is absolutely independent from that. So that is maybe the inner self of Indian tradition. Maybe it is the Selbst of Heideggerian thought. Maybe it is the same as active intelligence and active intellect of Meister Eckhart, Dietrich von Freiberg. But that is something that is more inner side of you. So the soul has the domains, the circles, and that is the inner circle of all the circles. So everything is expropriated from your soul. There is only the core. This core, it is the origin of the freedom, and that is apophatic center of the man. That something is pre-rational. So, and that I call radical subject. So
interesting. So what he actually means by pre-rational, which we heard about before, is let's just slap that label on it. Why not? Hyper-Cartesianism. So it's a totally non-relational subjectivity that does not even have the certainty of its own self-reflexivity. I mean, if ever you wanted to produce a human being that is actually completely controllable, it's what Dugin just suggested, insinuating that this would actually free you from control. Because you have stripped this subject bare from any relationship with anything or anyone else. And on top of it, just to be fair to the rationalists for once, you've stripped it of reason. Which implies that just as simplest understanding of rationality, that this inner core radical subject, whatever that really is supposed to be, this quote unquote true self, which again is totally individualistic, the way he describes it. Yeah. So radically individualistic that it has to universalize itself almost in order to regain any sense of orientation again. So it's a total inflation of subjectivity, but it's pre-rational. So it's not even capable of all the logical operations, let's say, of which the subject is in the Cartesian mode at least capable of, which is to try and find its way back to the world by the light of reason. I mean, this is perhaps the most unsympathetic reading that you could present, but I do this because what Dugin here does is he uses trigger words. Yeah, this is no longer philosophy. This is literally just programming stuff. You are going through a tyranny right now, he tells us. Now we can have a debate, yeah, about where we are in Europe, the European Union, in Britain, and the US when it comes to free speech and other such issues. But I really don't need someone from Russia to tell me that. you've got your own problems, mate.
The solution about this point of the freedom inside of us, I agree that everything inside of us as well is controlled, is programmed, is manipulated inside of us, except this moment. And if we discover this element, we know the reason of real freedom. So it is not about the human. It is something much more radical than human, much more inner than human inside of us, not outside. So that is important. So that is not easy to explain, but if we start to construct this this concept of how eternity is possible inside of the time that it destroys everything except itself. So we need to think Schatten in the context and the relation to this critical subject.
I'll just say this again. What Dugin really needs to do, instead of just talking about the eschaton, is perhaps to start thinking anything he's actually, because it's like the self from India, Sanskrit, it's like Heidegger, it's perhaps like this. No, nothing's been said. You've just dropped different. Be very careful about wild associations, always, because they usually mean that either someone's not thinking or trying to confuse you, or maybe it's also very confused himself. So I'll leave it at that. They now go into occultism, the other, which is the other side of the coin of enlightenment. The enlightenment, just historically seen, doesn't come without Masonic lodges that operate in secrecy, etc. So that should tell you something. So the turn to occultism instead of trying to again, here we have a pseudo Heidegger, someone who proclaims to be someone who reads Heidegger. Why does he never address the clearing for self-concealment? Die Lichtung für das sich verbergen, Lichtung und Verbergung, clearing and self-concealment. Never an issue, because that wouldn't allow him to go into the direction of occultism, which is then what they actually both agree on. So we can see again, they do end up in the same position, despite all superficial disagreements. And Dugin should really start thinking something through to the end. Or not think at all. That might be better. So I'd like to thank you everyone for listening. And well, here's someone named Dimitri. If this is your real name, then I should assume that you are perhaps from the Russian sphere. You are 100% right in what Dugin tries to do. Also, he tries to create his own reality and apply it to Russians. Well, I should think so, yes. And it's rather obvious. But to learn how to spot this, you really have to be steeped in philosophy. Or else, I would really rather recommend, if you're not willing to put in the work, just stay away from conversations such as this one. Because it will just confuse you to a point where you don't know what you're thinking anymore. Because what should have been done here, it should have been genealogy of concepts. And to some degree this was done, but for the most part what I've heard was heuristic trigger words, pseudo-categories. And also just outright lies. And frankly, nonsensical wild associations that lead nowhere except astray. So with this, I shall leave you. Thank you again for listening. But before you leave and before I leave, I'd like to invite you all to join me at my Heidegger course, where we shall learn thinking. Not stupid labels or retarded associations that make no sense and just insinuate something. Thinking. The essence of technology will turn out to be the realm of technics. Well, thank you, Dimitri. Thank you. And so if you can make it, come to the seminars. The seminar dates are listed here, 18th and 19th of October, 25th and 26th of October, 1st and 2nd of November. This will be block seminars. I lead the seminars. These are live Zoom seminars. These are not webinars. So these are actual, you're in a Zoom meeting with me. I lead the seminars. Will be very close to the text. And there will also be some time where we send you off into breakout sessions so you can have conversations with the others. There are 6 pre-recorded lectures and you can start reading, listening to now, and you can start reading now if you start, if you enroll today. So everything's been uploaded. Everything's mentioned what you should read. And so I hope that you can make it. If you really can't make the seminars, just join as a reader. If you really can't make it. If you can make it, then take the philosophical fellowship. If you'd like to take additional private tutorials with me, take the philosophical dialogue. Always remember, this is all I do. So any enrollment helps me keep the lights on, helps me allowed to do 3.5-hour streams on things like this as just today as well. You could also become a member on this channel, or maybe sign up on my Substack and support the work in this way. But the best way really to do it is by signing up for a course where you get actual content that isn't just content in this ordinary sense, but I would say actual content. It's we try to uncover what's going on. I am continuously very critical. I'm very self-critical as well, in the proper mode of self-critique and of critique of concepts. So that I'm not preaching, but I'm going into the thought and all that I actually do in this course, because I'm recording everything using technology, and I try to explain also what's going on from a viewpoint of Heidegger. So that perhaps is the self-critical aspect here as well. So there's also payment plans for the self-study tier, for the seminars, as much as for the private tutorials, of which there are a couple left only. So do take this one. This is the most popular. It would be great if so many of you who are now here today, 45, could actually sign up. And, well, thank you so much, Harris, for your super chat and for your continued support. I will reach out to you very soon. I just saw it this morning, so I'll be in touch in a couple of days and we can start arranging things. So this was, I wanted to stay for maybe 1.5 hours. It's now 3.5 hours. I think the last bit on occultism, I might do some other points on between Land and Dugin, but it was I have to say it was a fascinating debate. So just a second, what Land says, and I think Dugin as well. There is now again an openness to all kinds of things. I mean, if I think back to when I was younger, none of this would have happened. It's also wonderful that this can happen outside academia, because inside academia it's rather rare to hear anything like this. It probably still wouldn't be possible today. At the same time, one perhaps also needs to be critical of what's going on to a certain extent. So thank you all again very much. Thank you, Harris. Thank you, Dimitri, Marin, everyone I know here in the chat. I didn't see all of you, I'm sure, but thank you for listening. Thank you. And see you at my Heidegger course, okay? 1.5 weeks, so sign up now.